People in Israel and Iran are bracing for more airstrikes after Tehran made good on its pledge to retaliate for Israel's attacks on its nuclear sites and other targets. Israel says at least 3 people were killed and dozens more injured after Iran launched early morning strikes. South of Tel Aviv, a residential building was hit by several rockets. Multiple explosions were seen in the sky above Tel Aviv overnight as Israeli air defense systems intercepted multiple missiles.
Missiles fired from Iran in the sky over Tel Aviv. Most projectiles were intercepted by Israel's air defense systems. But some Iranian missiles did hit sites on the ground, including a high-rise near the Defense Ministry in central Tel Aviv. Several buildings were also struck and badly damaged in one of the city's suburbs. Dozens of people were injured in the attacks.
We just heard a very big explosion. Everything was shaking, smoke, dust, everything was all over the place.
In Israel, you're used to terror. It just depends who's going to get it this time.
In Iran's capital, Tehran, crowds gathered to celebrate news of the retaliatory airstrikes against the Islamic Republic's sworn enemy. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued an appeal to Iranians, urging them to rise up against their government.
And the time has come for you to unite around your flag and your historic legacy by standing up for your freedom from an evil and oppressive regime. It has never been weaker. This is your opportunity to stand up and let your voices be heard.
So far, there's no sign that Israel's military strikes are sparking dissent on the streets of Tehran. At an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council, Iran's ambassador said his country was justified in hitting back.
The Islamic Republic of Iran reaffirms its inherent right to self-defense as enshrined in Article 51 of the UN Charter. Iran will respond decisively and proportionately to these acts of aggression at a time, in a place, and by means of its choosing.
The tit-for-tat attacks are raising fears of a dangerous escalation in an already volatile region.
DW correspondent Emily Gordine is in Jerusalem. I asked her a short while ago about the latest over the overnight attacks.
Well, it's just gone 9 o'clock in Israel, and we're slowly starting to see the images of the destruction that was caused by these Iranian retaliatory strikes. We know that several buildings were heavily damaged across central Israel. We know that dozens were wounded, at least 3 were killed. Hebrew media also reported that 2 were trapped in a building that was hit by an Iranian missile. But it's also important to say that 3 hours ago, the IDF lifted restrictions in terms of people having to remain in bunkers. So they've been able to leave their bunkers. Many Israelis spent the night sheltering there. And now, about 3 hours ago, they've been told that they can leave them. They're meant to stay close by in a sign, essentially, that this conflict, this exchange of fire is not over yet.
Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that this was just the beginning of Iranian retaliation. What precautions, additional precautions, are Israelis taking?
Well, Israeli authorities yesterday issued a state of emergency. Schools have been closed, hospitals moved underground, the airports have been closed, most of the borders, especially the one along Jordan, has been closed. People were told to stock up on supplies. So we saw images yesterday, we saw footage of people flocking to supermarkets here to stock up for the coming days in case it gets so bad that they really can't leave their homes. But of course, overnight, Israelis, many Israelis have bunkers in their homes, so that does make it a bit easier in terms of finding shelter, because this is something that is compulsory in the erection of new buildings in Israel. So it is easier for Israelis to remain closer to shelter simply because they are in people's homes as well.
Got it. Now, Israel has also carried out more airstrikes on Iranian targets. Netanyahu says the attacks will go on for, quote, as many days as it takes. That's what he said. Any idea how long that might be?
I think that's very hard to say at this point. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made it very clear that Iran, in his view, had taken too many steps in advancing its nuclear program, and that's why Israel is now launching what it calls preemptive strikes on not just nuclear facilities, but also military infrastructure. We also saw several high-ranking military commanders killed in these Israeli strikes, as well as leading nuclear scientists in Iran. All of this is coming at a time when talks about Iran's nuclear program between the US and Iran had essentially, I don't want to say stalled, but they certainly hadn't been going as well as US President Donald Trump had hoped. And he, for himself, has warned Iran to essentially make a deal on its nuclear program and warned of quote, even more brutal Israeli attacks.
Emily, I'm curious, what do Israelis think of all this? You've described what they have been doing in terms of safety, but how are they reacting to all these strikes and counterstrikes?
Well, yesterday when we were talking to people in the streets ahead of these Iranian retaliatory strikes, people were still fairly optimistic, and that optimism has remained pretty constant, even though, of course, it was expected that Iran would respond to Israel's strikes yesterday morning. For many Israelis, Iran has been a problem that's been sort of in the backs of their minds for many years, for decades really. That is also fed in part by Netanyahu's own rhetoric that Iran poses the biggest problem, the biggest existential threat. He's been very hawkish about striking Iran. However, in the past, he has not had the support, especially from the US, to do this. But of course, it's important to mention here that Iran itself, from its political leaders, has repeatedly said that it wants to annihilate Israel. It refers to it as a Zionist entity. And for Israelis, certainly after what happened on October 7th, 2023, when Israel was attacked by Hamas and over 1,200 people were killed and over 250 were taken hostage, some of them who still remain in Gaza, they do not want a repetition. They don't want any more surprises when it comes to their security.
Right. And speaking of Gaza, how is all of this affecting the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and especially in Gaza?
Well, for Palestinians inside and outside Israeli territory, this was a scary night. Many Palestinians who live in Israel, they often don't have shelters in their homes because a lot of them live in very old buildings and they were not built with shelters. And then when you speak to Arab leaders in Israel, then they also will tell you that many Arab communities also don't have public shelters, not as many as, for example, their Jewish counterparts. Now, within the West Bank, of course, there are no shelters anywhere except for in the settlements. But, of course, Israel has an interest in protecting these settlements. And so it is in part also covered by the Iron Dome, Israel's extensive air defense system. Now, when it comes to Gaza, of course, Gaza is still going through a massive humanitarian crisis. The UN said on Thursday that it experienced a full internet blackout, which hampered humanitarian efforts severely. Then yesterday, the Under-Secretary General of Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, warned that without immediate action, Gaza is essentially descending into famine. So while all eyes are on Iran and Israel, the humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding in Gaza is still very, very present and very urgent.
DW's Emily Gordine in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Joining me now is Dr. Walter Posch. He is an Iran expert from the Institute for Peace, Support and Conflict Management in Vienna. Thanks for joining us. Iran has retaliated in response to Israel's strikes. There's been dozens of missiles. How far could this conflict escalate?
Well, if the conflict remains limited to Israel and Iran, it may escalate to a certain point where both sides have spent all their forces, like poker players having spent and used all up their cards. However, it is very unlikely that in case Iran does severe and more serious damage to Israel, that the US would not support Israel and join the fray. In this case, a major escalation has to be expected.
I think it's really hard to prognosticate right now. But one question is, how badly do we know anything about the impact of Iran's nuclear program and the damage on it from Israel's attacks?
Well, it must have been serious. More important than the generals who got killed are certainly the nuclear scientists, because the scientists are those who accompanied the program from almost its inception. They have all the institutional knowledge. They have also the very knowledge which is not yet documented, and they played a key role. And they're serious academics and certainly Iran's best. So that in that sense, from the level of ideas, experience, academic and practical knowledge, it's a serious blow.
So it sounds like you're saying attacks like this can prevent Iran from building nuclear weapons or delaying that. But could the attacks also have the opposite effect, that the government doubles down and tries to do a bigger push, despite the shortage of the brain trust to work on these weapons?
Well, first of all, the assumption is not that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. The negotiations that have been conducted with the EU and its allies 10 years ago, the whole international setup and the whole reason why the US and Iran are still negotiating is not a weapons program. It is about potential leaks of and potential misuse of a civilian program. And the Iranians insist that this is a civilian program. To go for a full-fledged arms program would, first of all, need a reversement of all Iranian positions until now. So the supreme leader had to take this decision. Now, with the number of civilian casualties in Iran rising above a certain level, because we fairly assumed that this was not the last round, then this may indeed happen. And the risk of doubling down becomes and going outright nuclear armed, whether in infringement with the nuclear non-proliferation treaty or not, depends very much on how the next negotiations with the US will be conducted, or whether Iran unilaterally breaks it down and leaves the conference or doesn't show up at all.
Now, with several Iranian military leaders killed from the attacks and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu calling on the Iranian people to stand up to the regime, could this actually lead to regime change in Iran?
Well, the erosion of the regime, like so many ideological regimes, is in place. Everyone sees it. But once you have civilian casualties by an enemy action, then it's not so easy that people would rise up simply and say, well, this regime is done. The regime has its root in a certain layer of the Iranian society. That's one factor. They're quite experienced, and increasingly, not so much regime problems, but real Iran problems came to the fore, like water problems, like the problems of the mismanagement of the Sunni minority, like ethnic questions. And all these points put the regime in a relative advantage, because they can always legitimately, or at least as they see it, argue that if we are gone, the whole country breaks down and there will be no handover to another regime. So from the time being, it's unpredictable. But then, even the last revolution, no one expected that the Shah would fall so quickly. And it seems to me that most people in the security apparatus and in the Iranian elites are waiting how long Mr. Khamenei still holds his position, because as long as he holds, he's a routinier, nothing changes, everyone knows what to do. But once he's gone, things change rather quickly.
Very quickly, the international community is calling for de-escalation. Do you see a way of this coming down?
Well, honestly, for the time being, it depends very much on how the Israelis will react now on the Iranian counterattack. If the first point is, are the nuclear negotiations and the direct talks with the Americans dead, or are they not dead?
Right.
If they are not dead, if there's continuation, then there is some hope. The international community is concerned. The concerns have been taken very seriously, I think, by both parties. But it depends on both players whether they think it's enough now or not. And as of now, I don't think that either side can step down from its current position, because from an Israeli perspective, the damage is not so big. The civilian casualties are far manageable in a way. Israel is a well-prepared country. And from an Iranian perspective, the idea is if they give in now, more will follow, and more demands will be tabled to them.
Dr. Walter Posch, thank you so much.
Thank you.